Hello, my name is Rue, and today I have a longer video that's going to be aimed at explaining as much of aiming as I can at my current skill level. Please feel free to leave any questions in the comments down below. So we're going to start out with some simple definitions of some fundamental techniques. So when I say a technique, I do not mean a magic bullet that can cure your aim. It's just an approach or a way of thinking on how to play the game, and it takes time and practice to learn. When I say muscle groups, I usually just mean some combination of your arm, wrist, and fingers. A micro adjustment is a small adjustment that's usually made with the wrist and the fingers. A track is typically performed as a combination of repeated motions that's used to stay on a moving target. What muscle groups are used for tracking often depend on the tasks. A flick is typically performed by starting with a large sweeping arm motion that smoothly transitions and ends with a micro adjustment. Tension is probably a term you've heard in the AIM community quite a bit, but you may not actually understand what it is. In order to understand tension, I want you to pinch your fingers together as hard as you can. You should feel some sort of pressure after. This is what we refer to as tension in the aiming community. Your range of motion is just the extent that you can move each muscle group. Speed matching is matching the speed of your motions to the bot's movement speed. Speed matching often involves learning how to translate 3D aiming movements into 2D mousepad movements. Target chaining is reading two or more bots' motions and repeatedly adding a new bot to those being read as one is killed. Smoothness is just a measure of how often you are on the bot, as well as how linear or jagged the motions you make are. Smoothness is important because if you are too jittery, you will fall off the bot entirely, or even if you are on the bot, you may make the bot motions harder for yourself to see visually. Blending is the idea that we can use all three muscle groups during aiming by transitioning smoothly between them. Oftentimes, changing muscle groups in the middle of aiming can cause jagged motions to occur on screen, but by focusing on blending your movements together, these unintentional movements become smaller. Click timing. By seeing when the crosshair is on the target, we can react or predict when and where our crosshair will land. Firing the shot at the right moment so that it lands on the bot as soon as it touches the center of the bot is called click timing. When to click can be just as important as deciding where to click. Over flicking is flicking past the bot. It's usually a bad idea as it makes you have to adjust backwards onto the bot, which is slower than being just short of the bot. It can also be known as leading a shot, but leading a shot usually involves a bot that will fall into your crosshair anyway. Underflicking is the preferred method of flicking for most targets. Underflicking is a technique that involves intentionally falling slightly short of the bot and finishing your flick with a micro correction. Underflicking technique requires good use of blending, or else you will just slow yourself down. This is why some players struggle to implement it. Flicking motions should not be so separate from the micro adjustments that they take as long or longer than the flicks themselves. When implementing underflicking, you should be finishing your flicks with your micro correction. Movement reading. Movement reading is a bit more complex than just looking at the bot. It involves reading the direction, acceleration, and pattern the bots move in. For example, by reading the direction first and tracking, you can begin adjusting immediately. As you ramp up speed towards the bot, you will need to read its acceleration in order to match its speed effectively. Then, once you've acquired the target, you need to understand the pattern that it will move in so you can react without being surprised by its movements. In clicking, this process is different, as instead you will use your peripheral vision to read the bots, then flick to the bot, microadjust, and repeat the process. Tension management, budget, and lockout are terms you may have heard in the game community but may not fully understand. As you use a muscle group, you will notice that it becomes more tired and shaky if you use too much tension while you are aiming. This is referred to as lockout within the aiming community, and the amount of tension you can use before you reach lockout is your tension budget. Getting better at managing this problem in general is called tension management. Tension release. By releasing tension in inactive muscle groups while we aim, we can maintain an amount of tension that allows us to stay accurate throughout the run without running out of tension budget. An example of releasing tension in an inactive muscle group would be to allow your wrist and fingers to rest for a moment while performing a large arm motion within a static clicking run. Fluidity is just how smoothly, quickly, and efficiently one can move through multiple targets on a screen. It is achieved through proper tension release, blending, underflicking, and cluster forming. So next up, we're going to have our general category tips. So there's three general categories: clicking, tracking, and switching. Clicking is usually led by fast arm underflicks that seamlessly blend into a microcorrection. Before you click, you use your peripheral vision to find the best target on screen and repeat the flick process. By alternating between your arm for large movements and your wrist and fingers for smaller ones, you can more effectively manage tension throughout a run. Going fast is very important here. If you are above 90% accuracy, you need to go faster. The top ranked players are not top ranked because they have 100% accuracy. They are top ranked because they are shooting many more shots than other players and hitting them at that high speed. The concepts of fluidity, clusters, and tension management are the most important here. Tracking requires good understanding of when and how to use different muscle groups, but in a different way than clicking. Instead of using your arm to flick, you add some underlying arm movement during longer strafes to extend the range of motion of your wrists and fingers, and take some of the tension off of them so that you don't go over your tension budget. Once the target changes direction, you then use your wrist to quickly adjust to the target and then stabilize with your fingers. In tracking, tension management, movement reading, and blending are the most important. Switching can be thought of as a mix of tracking and clicking tasks. These tasks need good understanding of both muscle groups from tracking and clicking. It differs slightly in technique from traditional clicking or static scenarios, as you really need to land your initial flick and then smoothly blend that into tracking motions without being shaky. This category requires good tension management, target chaining, reading, and blending. Now we're going to move into our subcategory tips. Subcategories are usually like the main categories for the most part, but they differ in small ways. In dynamic, the bots will move around and are usually evasive or small. Keep pacing consistent throughout the run and try not to slow down as you play. Reading the bots well will often let you position your crosshair where multiple are headed. This allows you to micro-correct onto each bot without the need to flick across the screen. You don't want to lead your shots entirely, since they will often strafe out of the way. Tension management, click timing, and fluidity are the most important concepts for dynamic clicking. In static clicking, the bots don't move, and they typically spawn with a fair amount of distance between them. You can change pacing throughout your run by using smoother wrist and finger flicks for targets that are clustered up, and using a faster arm underflick into a smooth micro adjustment for targets that are farther away. This is the typical technique for static. It involves good target chaining, tension management, accurate micro corrections, and fast enough arm movements to keep up with the score targets. In linear clicking, we have small bots that move in very predictable patterns. We start with fast initial flicks, but instead of underflicking, we intentionally lead the shot a bit so that the target falls into our crosshair. Once it does, you smoothly track the bot for a brief period and click. The effect should feel something like a flick and a catch. Precise tracking often involves large sweeping movements with smaller, slower bots requiring players to blend their arm, wrist, and fingers effectively to form a continuous, smooth motion. Reading changes in acceleration will be vital to proper speed matching in this category. Smooth vertical motions are also necessary for many scenarios within this subcategory. In control tracking, the bots will usually be small, evasive bots that have multiple changes in directions. Use your wrist to speed match on the bot's longer strafes. Some arm movement will be required to stay on the bot depending on how far it strafes. Once you read the bot beginning to change directions, use your fingers and wrist to quickly make adjustments back to the bot. You want to use minimal tension when micro adjusting to keep them quick without going into lockout. Understanding how to smoothly adjust onto the bot without overflicking or reading incorrectly is the key to improving here. Reactive tracking bots are usually much larger and faster than control tracking bots, but still follow a similar tracking ideology, with longer strafes being more wrist and arm dominant, and shorter ones being more finger and wrist dominant. The difference between tracking and control tracking, however, is that because the bots are slightly larger, you can get away with making snappier micro adjustment motions than you would be able to in control tracking. However, because the bots are so fast and strafe so often, tension management, speed matching, and motion reading all become very hard to juggle. The key to reactive is to stay fast, smooth, and manage tension well enough throughout the run. That way you don't become too shaky to properly read the motions of the bot. Speed switching is very much like static in that it often requires large, fast arm motions. The bots are typically easy to read with a fast time to kill. This puts emphasis on your ability to fluidly aim between multiple targets effectively, while also making micro adjustments along the way. Focus on landing your initial flicks and make sure your micros are blended into them fluidly, or else you will burn time correcting back to the bot. Farming clusters with target chaining will also help to go much faster than you would normally be able to. Speed switching can be thought of as a combination of static clicking and control tracking. Evasive switching tests your ability to smoothly switch between fast moving targets with a fair amount of distance between them and a longer time to kill. This means you still need to be fast, but smooth enough so that you can effectively track the evasive movements of the bot. Evasive switching requires fast micro adjustments and good movement reading. Evasive can be thought of as a mixture of dynamic clicking and reactive or control tracking, depending on the scenario. Stability switching tests your ability to switch between multiple small, long time to kill bots. They are not very evasive, but they still require accurate finger and wrist movements to track because of their size. Flicking fast is not very important because of how small and easy to read they are. Instead, this type of switching is highly dependent on your ability to make smooth adjustments with your fingers in order to track the bot without falling off. Stability switching can be thought of as a combination of precise tracking and linear clicking. Finally, we just have some general tips. These are things that I personally find will help you improve regardless of the category. So, for one, consistency. I personally play pretty much every day, but I think you can take shorter breaks without hurting your progress. I think it's just important to keep a routine that you can maintain over a long period of time without getting burnt out. If you feel like you aren't having fun, you should probably take a bit break and come back when you decide that you think it would be fun again. My play routine is to typically just push until I get a PB and then do whatever I feel like with the remaining time, whatever I feel is fun. So next up we have mental stack. Mental stack is a concept I learned about from a friend in the Smash community. The basic idea is that you form a list in your mind of what actions could occur and how you would respond to each individual action as it occurs. This is useful for things like movement reading, as you can prepare yourself to react to specific bot movements, or in games, react to animation cues. This strategy allows you to react faster and be more mentally clear throughout a run. Next, we have sensitivity. I think your sensitivity matters, but less than most people really seem to think. What it really does change is the ranges of motions that are required for certain muscle groups to make the same movements. So, with proper technique, you should be aiming similarly on most sensitivities that aren't extreme ends of the spectrum, with certain muscle groups taking more or less dominance in the overall movement, depending on how high or low the sensitivity is. What this means is that you should aim the same on high and low sensitivities. You will just end up moving certain muscles more or less, depending on the distances that are presented. So next up we have peripherals. I really don't think peripherals matter that much either. I have 10 gaming mice. No matter which one I pick up, I can always push scores. What's the most important, in my opinion, is what's comfortable to use for a long period of time, as well as what would complement the style of play you enjoy. I think you should just try a bunch of different combinations of mouse pad, mice, skates, and see what works for you. Playlists. People often recommend playlists. I personally think they can be very good if you're trying to specialize in a specific game or aim type. I do think, though, it's important to branch out and play a variety of scenarios since all of them sort of blend together in how they function. Being well rounded is really helpful. So, by understanding something that is holding you back in one specific task, you might figure out how to improve further in a different one. Bot reviewing is really important for improving as your mental image of how you play and how you're actually playing don't always align. Getting feedback from other players, like those in the Voltaic Discord linked below, can help to improve more quickly than just blindly pushing for scores. If you're feeling stuck, I think a hand cam can also really help you compare your own mouse movements to players that are higher level and see what you're doing differently that may be a mistake. Finally, we have mentality. I think aim training should not be stressful. This is a video game. Improving is supposed to be an enjoyable process, and if you aren't enjoying aim training, you should take a break. Learning to be critical of yourself without putting yourself down is an important part of improving, and having realistic goals and expectations from yourself is also important. A lot of people jump in expecting to improve very quickly and are disappointed when they don't see the results they wanted. But it takes time to understand things, and that's a normal part of learning. The most important part of playing a game is to have fun. So even if you are just here to get better at clicking heads in game, Remember to try to enjoy the process. If you aren't trying to have fun or aren't getting any real satisfaction from your scores, I truly believe that you will run into a wall while trying to improve. Thank you for watching.